Hey, I'm Brian Downs, and this is Prosex Studio. Let's talk about sex in movies, and let's talk about The Favorite. Nominated for 10 Oscars in 2019, Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, 2 Best Actress supporting nominations for Rachel Weisz and Emma Stone. They didn't win those, but Olivia Colman took home Best Actress for her portrayal of Queen Anne. What does this colossal achievement of the cinematic art form have to tell us about sexuality, or what is it trying to tell us? But before we get into that, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, helps out the channel. We appreciate it. When I say we, I mean all the important people. This film opens with Lady Sarah, played by Rachel Weisz, Lady Sarah Marlborough. She is a very close friend of Queen Anne of England. This is in the early 18th century, early 1700s. And we see very quickly that Queen Anne is shockingly uninformed. Queen Anne wants to build Lady Marlborough a palace, Blenheim Palace, as a gift, even though the country can't really afford it. The country's at war with France. Queen Anne was under the impression the war had been won, so what's the problem? And Lady Sarah explains to her that the war wasn't won, merely one battle was won. Oh, Queen Anne says, I didn't know that. Queen Anne isn't really qualified to be running a country, and really, Lady Sarah is doing it for her. Cut away from that scene, and we're only 3 minutes 15 seconds into the film. Emma Stone's character Abigail is coming to court. She is a cousin of Sarah's, a distant relation, and she's hoping to find a place at court, a job. She is poor, but she's played by Emma Stone, so she's beautiful, and she is ambitious. She's on her way to court in a carriage. The camera shows us the inside of this crowded carriage. We see Abigail, we see a man kind of slumped over his sleep. We see Abigail make eye contact with someone on the other side of the camera and give a little nod. Which seems strange to be making eye contact at that point. You've been in the carriage probably for hours, but this person is sitting directly across from you. Anyway, reverse angle, we see a man. We'll never see him again. Total NPC, no speaking part at all. But he kind of nods and smiles at her and then starts masturbating in front of her. Puts his hand down his pants. We don't need this scene in the movie. We don't need it at all. This carriage scene is not necessary. We could have begun with Abigail stepping out of a carriage, arriving at the palace. That's not what we get. We get this carriage scene just so that we can have this moment with a man who doesn't speak and who we never see again, absolute NPC, jerking off in the carriage in front of Abigail to show us that sex is bad and weird and off-putting and repugnant. Now, I would almost say this qualifies as one of my negative memes. Maybe I should come up with some more memes. But it doesn't quite make the bar. Because negative meme number 5 is, it's villains who sex. Bad people, bad characters enjoy their sex lives. Bad people are people who are sexy and have sex and seek sex out and are good at it, and so on. Very often, the way you know they're a villain is because they have sex. And that's almost what we have here, except we can barely call this guy a villain. He's masturbating, which falls under the rubric of sex. But we never see him again. He doesn't speak. He doesn't cause anything to change in the plot of this film. So I would say it's negative meme number 5, except he doesn't write it to the level of villainy. It's just the movie punching us in the face in the first 3 minutes. Sex is bad. Sex is ugly. So Abigail comes to court and soon starts to ingratiate herself at the high levels, finding opportunities to be near the queen and to make herself known to the queen. Abigail is ambitious and she wants to avoid being poor, which is an absolute nightmare, certainly in 1705. Lady Sarah is in a commanding position at court, very influential person, essentially ruling as queen, because the queen is shockingly underinformed, undereducated, ignorant of current affairs in spite of the fact that she has teams of experts whose job it is to report to her. Oh, and prone to screaming tantrums like she's 4 years old. So let's talk about that. This movie revolves around these three female characters, and there are almost no significant male characters, and it presents every male character as being an idiot, except for the character of Harley, Mr. Harley, who is a politician, political operator. By the end of the film, he'll be promoted to Prime Minister. Interestingly, the historical Harley, this is all, of course, based on British history, was in his early 40s at the time of these events. In this movie, the actor playing Harley is Nicholas Hoult, who's very talented, quite capable, but also was about 26 at the time this movie was made. So that's a deliberate choice designed to make him look weaker compared to Rachel Weisz and so on, older characters who are more experienced. But that said, these female characters aren't very nice. They are, schemers and plotters who are out to get what they can get for themselves. Lady Sarah's ambition is to run the country for the good of the country as she views it. Abigail's ambition is just to secure a future for herself. The Queen doesn't seem to have a lot of ambitions. The Queen doesn't really seem to have any kind of organized plan or thinking at all. She's utterly unqualified to run a country. So these characters aren't very nice. So it's kind of being presented as one of these boys are stinky feminist narratives, but the women are pretty stinky as well. So that's interesting. Lady Sarah sees that Abigail is trying to ingratiate herself with the Queen, and Lady Sarah doesn't like that very much. Abigail is certainly younger than Sarah is by a decade or so. And we find out about half an hour into the film that Lady Sarah and the Queen have a sexual relationship. Lady Sarah, by the way, is married to Lord Marlborough. Interesting exception to the male characters in this film. Lord Marlborough is commanding the English forces. He has recently won a victory over the French, and he is going into the field to fight another battle. He will be, away out of the country for months and putting himself in harm's way. Everyone has great confidence in his ability as a commander, and as it turns out, he will win the victory over the French. Lord Marlborough is a competent man who's risen to a high position of authority in the military and does his job very well, which is why he's not on screen for more than 2 minutes. Gotta get him off the stage as fast as we can, because we might get the idea that somebody around here, some man, has the slightest idea what they're doing. But, back to the point. Lady Sarah and Queen Anne are in a sexual relationship. You don't get the feeling that Lady Sarah has sincere feelings of love for Queen Anne. They've known each other since they were children. But rather that Lady Sarah is trying to stay close to the power, to maintain the power. Lady Sarah only has the power she has through Queen Anne. Abigail happens to see one of Lady Sarah and Queen Anne's sexual encounters, although Lady Sarah and Queen Anne don't realize it. So now Abigail knows that Queen Anne is sexually interested in women, and now Abigail will start presenting herself in a flirtatious way to Queen Anne. Abigail is younger than Lady Sarah and a lot less demanding. Lady Sarah is rather imperious and commanding with the Queen, to keep her in line and get her to behave like the Queen. Whereas Abigail just says yes ma'am basically to everything and smiles a lot. At the same time, Abigail is playing a game of come here, go away with Samuel Masham, who is a young man of the court. Masham cannot marry her because she is merely a servant, although she is from an aristocratic family fallen on hard times. Abigail understands that a good marriage is how you succeed in her world, and so she's trying to marry Masham. She does not seem to have the slightest romantic or sexual feeling for Masham. There's a scene where they're out in the forest together and he's literally chasing her around and she's provoking him on, and then running away from him. And he tries to grab her and she, runs away and stops and looks back at him. And then at one moment she says to him, "No, stop, kiss me properly first." And he comes in to kiss her which she has just invited him to do. And she knees him in the balls and he goes down. So, sex is danger, danger is sex. That's negative meme number 2 right there. Even when a woman who's clearly flirting with you says, come here and kiss me, you're about to get kneed in the nuts. But the point of all of that is that Abigail does not seem to have any actual romantic or sexual feelings for anyone. She merely uses her sexuality to gain position and security. I have some sympathy for Abigail. She wants a secure future. Who doesn't? And she lives in a world where poverty is a nightmare, a fatal nightmare. In fact, she has a line. I must take control of my circumstance. I will need to act in ways that meets the edges of my morality. And when I end up in the street selling my asshole to syphilitic soldiers, steadfast morality will be a fucking nonsense that will mock me daily. That is what she's trying to avoid, and I don't blame her. But also notice that the horrifying doom that she's trying to avoid is full of sex. It's life as a prostitute. Danger is sex. Danger is sex is the negative meme that says that sex and danger are often presented as the same thing, whether in an exciting way or in a terrifying way as it is here. Another thing to note is that Abigail talks to the Queen and to other characters, Lady Sarah, about her own sexual past, wherein her father rented her out to a man her father owed money to, where she was raped many times. Never does she talk about any sexual encounter or relationship in her past that she took any pleasure in or that was pleasurable in any way. It's terror and horror all the way through. And she is not now in a relationship in spite of being a very attractive young woman. And she is only looking for a relationship if that relationship will make her rich. That's it. So her sexuality is an extremely negative, tragic, hard-hearted thing. Abigail will carry her flirtations with the Queen to the point of accidentally falling asleep in the Queen's bed when the Queen is not in her bedroom, and accidentally doing it in the nude so that the Queen comes in and finds her there. And that leads pretty quickly to the Queen sending for Abigail in the middle of the night. The Queen suffers from gout and pain in her legs. And Abigail knows how to treat it. She is familiar with herbal treatment and otherwise uses, sympathy to help treat the Queen's pain. And so the Queen sends for her in the middle of the night. And Abigail comes to the Queen's chamber, and the Queen says, rub my legs, and very shortly, Abigail is rubbing the Queen. This scene is shot like a thriller, like a suspense thriller or a horror movie. It is dark, the shadows are sharp, it uses in situ lighting, which is to say everything is lit with candles, well-lit faces, and everything else is black. It starts with a servant bursting into Abigail's room, throwing the door open in the dark, come with me, like the Gestapo, and she goes to the Queen's room, and the music is tense as Abigail starts rubbing the Queen's leg, and the Queen is clearly enjoying it. The expression on the Queen's face is one of sensual pleasure. Meanwhile, by the way, Lady Sarah is receiving news in the middle of the night. A message has just come in that the English forces are poised to attack the French. The great battle will commence any moment, and the fate of the realm and England and her husband all turn on this. Danger is sex. This scene is not presented as being sexy or fun for anyone except maybe the Queen. It's presented as terrifying and full of danger. Having received important news about the war, Lady Sarah goes to the Queen's bedchamber. Lady Sarah, being the Queen's girlfriend, has her own key to the private entrance, goes in, walks in, the candlelight reveals the Queen in the position of Big Spoon to Abigail, and we see Abigail's naked breasts. Emma Stone's naked breasts. Double treat. At this moment of greatest tension, greatest risk, what will happen? Will Lady Sarah fly into a rage and burn this son of a bitch in place down? We don't know, oh, what's going on in the war, the fate of the realm. At this moment of great tension and great risk is when we see somebody's tits for the first time. Lady Sarah retreats, stunned by what she's seen, but Abigail noticed that she came in. By the way, all of this intrigue by muff diving is negative meme number 5. It's villains who sex. These characters, Lady Sarah and Abigail, are hard-hearted schemers. They want to either hold on to power or gain power, and that's it. That's what they're doing, and they will manipulate people and hurt people and lie to people to do it. They are villainous. There's nothing nice about them. In what way are they good? I have some sympathy for both of them, but you have sympathy for the best villains. Abigail is trying to avoid hideous 18th century poverty. Lady Sarah is trying to steer the country in some sort of rational way. Queen Anne certainly isn't capable of that. But still, these are people without empathy. They're villains. So now it's knives out. It's kill or be killed. Only one of them can be the Queen's girlfriend. Although no one actually consulted the Queen about that. The Queen seems quite happy to have both their attention. But Abigail and Lady Sarah are rivals. Abigail drugs Lady Sarah's tea. Lady Sarah goes for a ride by herself 2 minutes later and passes out because the drug, falls off her horse, and the horse manages to accidentally drag her into a brothel. Lady Sarah suffers a cut on her face, marring her beauty, a scar, which I thought, by the way, was quite dashing. It made me want to stare at Rachel Weisz by candlelight, but who doesn't? So the horse kind of drags her into a brothel, and she is missing. She's gone missing. She's missing for some days. She's sick at the brothel, recovering from the poisoning, and then the brothel keeper says to her, hey, guess what? You're going to be a slave prostitute now. Which strikes me as a little bit odd. You know, first of all, have you not noticed that this woman is very finely dressed and was dragged in here by a very valuable horse? Do you think no one's looking for her? Anyway, the madame says you can suck for your supper, and while she's saying that, while we're hearing that, what we're seeing is a montage of prostitutes who are slave prostitutes who are all going to be dying of syphilis soon, shaking their tits at customers and so on. We see nudity while Lady Sarah is being threatened with this grotesque fate that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Danger is sex. Lady Sarah, of course, says something is a good line. I should have written it down. Have you ever seen 10 gold sovereigns? And the madame says, in my dreams. And Lady Sarah says, go and talk to, so-and-so, another aristocrat I know, and then we'll sort this out. So Lady Sarah does not get made into a prostitute. She escapes that. But in the meantime, Abigail's maneuverings and manipulation of the Queen have put Abigail in a position where she has been made into a lady and given £2,000 a year in income from the crown and married to Samuel Masham, the young man who's all besotted with her. And there's an interesting scene where Abigail is in her room with her new husband, for whom she has no feelings whatsoever. He's like, hey, let's make love, let's do it, it's my wedding night and I'm hard as a rock over here. It's our wedding night, he says. And she sits with him, stares off into a corner, and talks to herself about where is Lady Sarah, what's going on with her, where will the next blow come from, is she in hiding, is she plotting against me? Well, she's giving her new husband a handjob. She doesn't care about him at all. It's villains who sex. In the end, it's Abigail who wins this game of beds, and Lady Sarah is banished from court and on the outs with the Queen, and eventually she and her husband, Lord Marlborough, back from the wars, and again kept to a minimum of screen time because the movie doesn't want to show you a man who knows his dick from his thumb, are charged with embezzling. Clearly, Abigail cooks up these charges of embezzling. And it's implied that they're arrested at the end of the film. They're at their country house and a bunch of soldiers show up on horseback. Never fear though, their actual historical counterparts did very well. The Marlboroughs went on being rich aristocrats, and they had their ups and downs in the intrigues of the court, but they both died of natural causes as wealthy people, so don't cry for them. The film ends on a scene of Abigail and the queen who is ever more ill and sort of out of her mind and getting uglier. In a pile of pampered rabbits, the queen has 17 pet rabbits because she had 17 pregnancies that did not produce any living offspring, so she has the rabbits instead. And the queen is in full-on Queen of Hearts mood and makes Abigail rub her legs, and she's holding on to Abigail's head while Abigail is rubbing her lower body. And none of it looks very pleasant at all. So here we are again with the Oscars hate sex. The movie's approach to sex is negative. No one seems to ever have an enjoyable sexual encounter or a sexual encounter that is meant to actually produce pleasure or feelings of love. Perhaps the queen is, but she is being thoroughly manipulated by everyone around her. England has lost certainly a dutiful steward in Lady Sarah, and Abigail has trapped herself in, well, sort of the position of sex slave to the queen. So in the end, it's negative. Also, we come to negative meaning number one, the wanting disaster. Wanting sex, having sex, talking about sex, trying to get sex leads to bad results. Their sexual relationships with one another has led to this pile of unfortunate outcomes. Here's the Oscars telling us that this constant barrage of sex negativity that we see in the movies is high art. It is to be much admired. You should like it, and you should ask for more. Why is this happening? Why are we under siege like this? Everywhere I look, I see more of this. Sex is bad, sex is ugly, sex is repulsive. People who want sex are villains, people who try to have sex are stupid. I see it in Marvel, I see it in the Oscar films, I see it everywhere. Check out the other videos on the channel. You'll see what I'm talking about. In the meantime, like, subscribe, talk to your friends about it, comment. Please disagree with me. I really enjoy it when people disagree with me. And I'll see you next week.